And hello, everybody. Today I am here with Craig O'Sullivan, and we're going to have an exciting conversation regarding blockchain, cryptocurrency, and why people are still getting involved, even though so many people have witnessed such big challenges, such as FTX, which Craig is going to be talking about, and some major, I'm just going to call it like crash in the entire crypto market with so many companies going out of business and things like that. So why are people still getting involved? And we're going to be going into that conversation. But Craig, you just got back from Art Basel and many blockchain events in Miami. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I always love going down to Miami. Miami, as you're aware, I'm sure most of your audience is aware, has become a real crypto hub over the last 2 years, and that's a combination of things. Obviously, Miami and Florida were very much at the forefront of staying open when other states were closing down. And then, of course, you got the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, who's been a huge advocate for blockchain technologies and crypto investment. And, his efforts have certainly started to pay off. So, Bitcoin Miami in 2021 was really the first large conference coming out of the pandemic. I attended that. And then, of course, they had a massive hit this year in April for the 2022 conference, where they had it over at the Miami Beach Convention Center. And you probably had about twice as many attendees compared to last year. Then, of course, Art Basel and the various NFT and Web3 events that happen in late November and early December have further generated interest in the market and in the city as being a crypto hub.
Nice. And why I think you're very well positioned to speak on this subject is the idea that, I met you at Web3X, which is one of those events where the people that are still going to those types of events are what, as I discussed with some of the people there, are people who, really have dove into the industry, who really understand the business and, what's really involved with blockchain and not just the speculative cryptocurrencies that are out there. And where I found interesting, or what I found interesting about you and your career, is how you have consulted for some relatively like conservative companies that really dig into the I want to say like propositions value, but also with like more, you really have to be able to prove a return on investment with some of the companies that you work with, as opposed to, a startup venture capitalist or whatever. So from your experience, Craig, working with, these big companies and all these events that you've been going to, what would you say, what's going on right now? Like after the big FTX issue, after all of the, the controversies that are happening right now, why are people still involved? Why are people still going to these events?
Well, what I found from attending Web3 and crypto related events over the past few years is that people there are very eager to engage with others and network with others, more so than any type of industry conference that I've been to in the past. And I've been to my share over the years. I think in a large part it has to do with the fact that people aren't forced to attend, by their companies or their bosses, but they're actually there because they want to be there. And that makes a big difference in people's attitudes and their approach to maximizing the experiences as much as possible. Plus, too, I think, Web3 conferences have a nice combination of side events and art and music that they try to incorporate into it as well, unlike your typical industry conference. And it's also a very eclectic group. There are people from all walks of life in Web3 and crypto, more so than your typical industry where, it's more homogeneous. So it's more heterogeneous in this industry. And, that certainly adds to the overall positive experience. Plus, too, what we've seen in geopolitics over the past few years has certainly given, crypto and decentralized finance a lot of credibility. It didn't really exist a few years ago, certainly not here in the US, where decentralization, was more of an issue that mattered. But as we've seen from the pandemic and a lot of these authoritarian decisions and moves by US corporations and politicians, it's given it a lot more credibility, and I think it's given a lot more importance. Now that's interesting because it's gained mass appeal and a lot of institutional investment, and they're not necessarily big proponents of that. So we're kind of seeing like a dichotomy here and a bifurcation.
So here's a question. Now, you definitely hit some really good points there. I mean, the whole idea that cryptocurrency, blockchain, this is an industry that can potentially affect so many people, from artists to huge venture capitalists to technologists to even, every mom and pop business or whatever, real estate, things like that. And you've seen that just in Miami alone through those events, plus Art Basel. Did they mention NFTs at Art Basel at all?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a big part of Art Basel
Okay.
now.
Cool.
Many of the artists have NFT versions of their paintings or their artwork.
Yeah.
And in many cases, they'll exhibit it side by side. There are really three major Web3 and crypto conferences that took place last week. One was Web3 Miami, which is the one that I attended. And another one was Decentral. And then the other one was Women of Web3.
Amazing. And it's such a wide range of people, which is, where I think there's so much value in that community that you're saying that helps to not just grow these events, but to also grow whatever the projects and have the support for all those different subjects, or what would you call them, verticals within blockchain or cryptocurrency. But also, it makes sense of why the artist might be getting into it, or why maybe a technologist or startup might be getting into it. But what about these bigger companies that are getting involved? With all the prices of everything being so speculative and so volatile, why would a bigger company get involved? What sort of solutions is blockchain still providing to some of these people, or what's going on in that atmosphere, the super big picture?
Well, I think big companies would still want to get involved because they see, future potential in it for sure. And that's the general trend. I mean, it also depends on the company, right? There are various reasons. Some may say, okay, well, the fall of FTX was partially predetermined because of all the major players that were involved, and that maybe it was partially to usher in central bank digital currencies so that it would offer these political institutions greater control over the monetary flow and the populace. I mean, obviously these are theories. These aren't necessarily facts, but there's certainly some supporting evidence out there. So that might be a reason why some of the larger institutions would want to get involved.
Did you say would or wouldn't? Would, right?
Would.
Would.
Oh, yeah.
So the larger institutions would want to get involved primarily because of
control and power
that
it allows.
Yeah, right.
Now that's antithetical to, of course, what crypto is about. But as we've seen with social media and the internet, it's all evolved, or devolved is probably a better way of putting it, from its initial intent. Right.
Yeah.
So why would crypto be any different? Right.
So can you go a little bit more into the topic of regulation and government involvement versus decentralization. Because before we started this podcast, we did have this interesting take on Kevin O'Leary, who was talking about regulation during Web3X. Can you talk a little bit more about this idea?
So Kevin O'Leary is one of the keynote speakers at Web3 Expo in Vegas last month. That's where, of course, you and I met. And I've always been a big fan of Mr. Wonderful and Shark Tank. I like the fact that he's always been, fairly cold in his approach, or at least very straightforward. He doesn't mince words, unlike some of the other sharks. And he's also been a big advocate of crypto after, of course, initially criticizing it, but in recent years, he's really come around to it and been a big investor. And FTX is obviously one of those major investments that he's made. And he not only was an investor, but he was a major advocate of it and a spokesperson as well. During his talks at Web3 Expo in Vegas, he was talking about regulation having to happen in the industry at a much greater scale in order for it to compel institutional investors to consider it even further, in order for mass adoption of crypto and mass investment of it. He actually said he could see it being one of the new S&P sectors, just like financial services, or an extension of that. But he was talking about crypto regulation having to happen, and he thought if we had a shakeup in Congress. Now, this was about 3 or 4 weeks before the election took place, the midterms took place. But he felt that if the Republicans came back and were the majority in Congress, that could help further discussions on crypto regulation, because he felt that was actually an area where both sides of the aisle could come to an agreement on. And sure enough, that was the case. Republicans took over the majority of the House. But what did happen after that nobody was expecting was the collapse of FTX, which was the second largest crypto exchange in the US. And not only that, but Sam Bankman-Fried was a regular on Capitol Hill discussing his ideas for regulation for the industry. And there are a lot of very influential folks involved in FTX, as we've seen here in the weeks after it actually collapsed.
Yeah. Here's a quick question. So,
Yeah.
I did remember some of what Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, some of his big arguments is that, with regulation, there's more of the conservative investor types are going to be willing to be involved because there's protections and all of that. So in terms of regulations, and, I know the other side of the spectrum, there's a lot of, super pro cryptocurrency blockchain people that, vouch that, decentralized is the only way because that's how it's designed. So in terms of like regulations and everything, I mean, what are going to be like, what are they really talking about in terms of regulation? Are they going to like limit the number of Bitcoins that miners can produce in a year? Or are they saying the banks have to purchase up a certain amount? Like, how are the regulations really going to come down?
Yeah, I don't know if I haven't seen any specifics mentioned. Okay. Now, Kevin O'Leary has gone on his, public apology tour, so to speak, after all of this. And he's been emphasizing regulation even more so now. However, there are already major laws on the books when it came to Ponzi schemes or flywheel schemes, commingling of corporate and user funds, which Sam and FTX were doing. So as far as I'm concerned, we already had enough rules on the books going back decades that easily could have been enforced. And we had Gary Gensler, the head of the SEC, who had regular meetings with Sam. You had folks that were from Obama's CFTC division that were, directors of compliance and regulatory policy for FTX. The CFTC, of course, is the Commodities and Futures Trade Commission. So, I mean, there was already enough folks on there or being involved to have known better, so to speak, right? But it still happened either way. So I don't necessarily think regulation would have made a damn difference in this case. We already had enough regulation for the types of schemes that he was pulling.
Interesting. That's a really interesting take because I never really got that part of it. Like I knew what was going on with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, but no one ever really mentions that, there were so many hands involved. I mean, it almost reminds me of Theranos with I think her name's Elizabeth Holmes, where she had like high level people involved with that company, but to see that even with government people involved with FTX, there was still some issues. So that's an interesting point that you're making, and that's such a huge failure. I mean, what like can you give a scale of that situation?
A scale of what? How much was lost?
Yeah.
I'm not too sure what type of hit the overall crypto market took on this, but I mean, you're talking about $8 billion in assets that were lost for FTX. I mean, so
yeah, and that's a lot of people.
I do know it was the largest example of a Ponzi scheme since Bernie Madoff, and that would have been back in 08, 09. I mean, so this had a lot of tentacles, through finance and the federal government, and of course too all the spokespeople, the high profile spokespeople that were involved. Tom Brady, as we mentioned, Kevin O'Leary, who else was it? Steph Curry, many others as well. Larry David from Curb Your Enthusiasm. He was the one who had the big Super Bowl commercial.
Yeah, I remember that.
Promoting FTX. So, I mean, huge names here. Now, granted, paid spokespeople aren't necessarily supposed to be doing due diligence on company financials, right? I mean, they're just involved in marketing the company. They have their own marketing agreements. But when you talk about, the various government officials that are involved in regulation when it comes to financial services, Gary Gensler, SEC, and, having former senior directors now who are senior executives for the company, like they're the ones that need to know. I also read that, one of the senior leaders for FTX was involved in this online betting debacle, where there was a lot of fraud and unscrupulous activity that took place about 10, 12 years ago. And, that didn't raise any red flags or alarms or further scrutiny. So, I mean, this, like I said, I don't think regulation would have made a damn difference in this case.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, whether it's decentralized and, people are okay. So here's a question that, do you think that when it comes to the whole decentralized situation with cryptocurrency and, despite the fact that even government people getting involved, right? So, and they still have these issues like the gambling problems and all of that, do you think that doxing for lack of a better term, having good documentation of the people involved in a cryptocurrency is still necessary then? So because that ultimately centralizes the success of a project to central figures, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to vet. I mean, whenever you have a project, that certainly if it's involves a lot of financing or funds, um, you have to vet the senior leaders. I mean, that should go without saying. I mean, but I can't speak to what type of vetting process Sam had. It seemed like he seemed like he was almost handpicked for this. So
I thought he made FTX himself or with the team.
look, the story goes, and I'm sure this was a lie too, just like everything else about the guy. But he says that he was able to make $1 billion off of crypto arbitrage trading activity back in 2015, 2016, 2017. I don't buy that for a second. I'm sure maybe he made a few $1 million doing that, but not enough to, start one of the top 2 or 3 exchanges in the US. He's just a kid.
Yeah.
But he had some pretty good connections through his parents. I know they were both Ivy League law professors. I believe his mother also was a big political action committee and source of donations for many politicians. I mean, that's no secret now. Sam himself was doing that. And that's part of a lot of the outrage too, is that, he was stealing from people and then making political and activism donations with their money without their permission. I mean, it's just one more thing, with this.
Yeah, man, that is wild because when I was trading, I primarily avoided FTX, and even though I was constantly hearing like, "Oh, this is the one, the most reliable. You should use this," and all that, but for whatever reason, I just never hopped on there. And what I think is also interesting is, the mainstream media that I've been hearing is mainly, just the idea that Sam Bankman-Fried, he was possibly stealing money or being accused of that. But there's a lot more going on behind the scenes that you're sharing with me that are being revealed now that I think is so interesting that you're not quite getting in the main media, which I guess is probably because.
I mean, the mainstream media, as we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years, has lost all of its credibility. I mean, if you weren't suspicious of the media narratives, beforehand, you probably are now. They routinely, regardless of what the story is, but they will routinely omit major important facts or context. So they'll focus on maybe something that certainly is true and factual, but it might only represent 10% of the story. And when you know the entire story, then that 10% really is insignificant. It's the stuff over here that isn't being emphasized or focused on that really is the driver of the story of the issue and of potential outcomes and the fallout. So look, Sam Bankman-Fried was obviously a media darling. This is why I said, he was kind of like handpicked for this. I mean, you had all these major forces, both in DC and in the media, and even in finance for that matter, who were propping him up and saying all these wonderful things about him and just, was deliberately, not scrutinizing him. I mean, who knows? I mean,
Yeah, I was constantly seeing posts about him being like, "Oh, I don't like money. I just want to give away all my money, like billions of dollars." So
yeah, I mean, that was all BS. Yeah, he's giving away not his money, but the average Jane and Joe's money without them even knowing it or without their permission. It's just he's an asshole of epic proportions.
yeah,
I cannot stand the guy. Cannot stand him. And that's one of my problems with Kevin O'Leary is he's lost a lot of credibility in my eyes, and I'm sure in many others. I used to be a fan of him. But the fact that he's not even harping on all the fraud and the unscrupulous activity that Sam caused, saying that, he'd potentially invest in him again. Like, how could you even consider that? So, and he's focusing more on regulation than the illicit activities. Like I just said, I mean, there's just basic policies and laws on the books already when it comes to commingling of funds, user funds and corporate funds, Ponzi schemes. I mean, like, this is nothing new. Okay, it might not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, crypto is obviously a relatively new industry, so may have not been a major industry in crypto before, or at least not in the public eye, but it's been a major issue in finance and investing before. So,
Yeah.
I'm not buying that. I mean, that just seems like it's like a crutch that he's using, Kevin O'Leary, that is, or something to deflect, from the true problems here. But that's really my take on all of this in a nutshell.
So with all of this happening, where do you think the light at the end of the tunnel is for blockchain or cryptocurrency? Or is it something which, I'm guessing the answer to is that you are still pretty bullish on cryptocurrency or blockchain, but
as long as it doesn't become hijacked for nefarious reasons, I would be greatly concerned about a CBDC implementation.
I hear
that
you.
To me, that to me would pretty much kill it.
Yeah, I hear you.
Because that's antithetical to what crypto is about. Now, Bitcoin is really the only true decentralized currency in crypto too. Everything else, as far as I know, we know who the founding team is, right?
Yeah.
Not with Bitcoin. So.
Yeah, it's still a mystery. Not
right?
I think there's some rumors, good rumors, but it's still a mystery. Quite the mystery.
You're right. So I mean, that to me is the only major cryptocurrency that's truly decentralized. And for that reason, it'll probably emerge as the clear-cut winner. Plus, all of the code has already been built into it. It's not like they can print more of it, as they can do with any other currency, whether it's fiat currency or Ethereum even. Right? I mean, they still print, although there are caps maybe to how much they could print on an annual basis, but they still can do it. Now with the movement from proof of work to proof of stake, it was supposed to make it deflationary. So maybe that'll be, helpful in that sense as well. But again, we know who the founder of Ethereum is. It's Vitalik Buterin, and of course, he has a consortium behind him as well. So I think Bitcoin will be a winner no matter what. I don't know about the rest of it though.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time to do this interview and to talk about some of these big issues that are happening in cryptocurrency right now and blockchain and all of that. And with that, if someone wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way?
You can follow me on Twitter at Craig O'Sullivan.
Awesome. And with that, everybody, thank you for listening. And Craig, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.